Hello, everybody. It's wonderful to see all you lovely folks joining us today. I'm Narelle Allen-Dunham with the New York State Department of Health with the Office of Drug User Health, and I oversee our buprenorphine access initiative. We are thrilled to welcome our keynote speaker this morning. So from the Office of Health Equity and Human Rights, it's my pleasure to introduce Deputy Commissioner Johanne Morne. She is an exceptional public health leader with a long, rich history of working in state government, as well as a wealth of experience working in the community as a director of drug user health programs. Johanne leads the team that's working to address health disparities and improve diversity, equity, and inclusion within the department and our partners in New York. Her team is comprised of the former offices of Minority Health and Health Disparities Prevention, as well as the Office of Gun Violence Prevention and our AIDS Institute, where the Office of Drug User Health lives. Johanne is a graduate of the College of St. Rose with a Masters of Science focused in education and counselling. Thank you so much for giving your precious time to us today. I'll hand you over.
Oh my goodness, Narelle, thank you so much for the introduction, and really good afternoon, everyone. I am just thrilled to join you today. This is such an important conversation, and the opportunity to learn as well as to share the experiences that you've had as it relates to ensuring that we are doing everything we possibly can with the tools that we have for individuals who use drugs to maintain safety and health. So, you know, I want to say that oftentimes when you do a keynote, you think about what is it that can be said that might be new or novel to the participants or to the members of the audience. And I think the reality is all of you are representative of the experts in these discussions. The commitment and compassion that each of your organizations and your teams are putting forward in really looking at how we safeguard individuals who use drugs is huge. So I can't commit that I'll have anything new or novel to say, but what I want to do is reiterate many of the things that you already have in practice, and certainly show that consistency as well as knowledge shared across our nation is what is allowing us to be able to advance and move forward in the interventions that are proving to be effective. Unfortunately, in the United States, we know that overdose deaths have reached unprecedented levels. And also with that, we recognize increasing urgency to deliver effective treatments as it relates to opioid use disorders. Structural racism and other forms of racism certainly speak to the impact on equity as it relates to accessing services and as it relates to the overall life and life satisfaction of individuals, putting individuals at increased risk of substance use and certainly, unfortunately, as we know, overdose. Structural racism has prevented communities of color, individuals who identify as Black, Indigenous, other people of color, from having equal access to the resources that are necessary in order to support individuals on a day-to-day basis. And this is not unique, as you know, certainly not a unique conversation as it relates to substance use. Structural racism and other forms of racism have impacted and prevented and created barriers for people, particularly people of color, Black and Hispanic individuals, Indigenous individuals, other people of color, from accessing a whole host of services that have an absolute impact on their life and on their life choices. When we take into consideration the experiences of poverty, adverse childhood experiences, intergenerational trauma, as well as intergenerational substance use, and we consider the challenges that individuals have in accessing in a consistent basis social determinants of health, we have to acknowledge what those barriers are. But most importantly, not only identifying and acknowledging, but finding the spaces and finding the networks in which we can respond in a way that can allow people access, especially in a sustainable way. When we think about inequity and injustice, what we know is that one of the largest challenges that we have is being able to sustain and allow changes to actually be impactful. And that's a huge part of what we need to continue to focus on. We also know that the absence of social determinants of health have a huge impact and certainly influence the risk trajectories of individuals who use drugs. When we talk about, and I say this all the time, and I want to say it here again today, Oftentimes when we speak of individuals who we're trying to serve and individuals who we so much love, we tend to use words like marginalized communities and vulnerable communities, impacted individuals. And I don't deny that any of those words are in fact a descriptor. But I also want to stress that the communities that you are a part of, that you have developed and that you lead, are what lend to the strength within these communities. And the work that you do from a harm reduction lens is what also reminds us of the strength of the individuals that we're serving. And with that, as we think about how can we become sort of the call to action of impacting change and recognizing the strengths along with the vulnerabilities that individuals experience, we have to take into consideration the frameworks and the areas in which we need to focus on. And we have to think about what is the biggest and most likely influencer of individuals losing their lives and address those from the very beginning. Certainly from my early days of working in substance use, there have been significant advancements as it relates to medications available for opioid use disorder. And that absolutely includes buprenorphine. And even there too, as we think about these advancements, we also have to consider the impact as it relates to racism on the inability for all persons to have equal access to these advancements, such as buprenorphine and other forms of assisted treatment. Health inequities and access to different treatments for racial and ethnic minorities and the barriers to treatment remain high. They include philosophical, regulatory, administrative, as well as clinical constraints. I want you to think about the policies and the protocols that you have in place within your own organizations. And I want you to ask the question as a call to action, are these policies and protocols absolutely essential, or are they creating a barrier in and of themselves in an effort to maintain consistency or a certain sense of order in the way in which we provide care? For those of you on today's call, the work that you're doing certainly speaks to one great example of how we don't allow policy or process to create a barrier, but in fact, we allow policy and process to advance opportunity. Looking at low threshold approaches that reduce stigma surrounding effective medications and the facilities that are available to individuals. A medication first, a low threshold approach reduces the risk of overdose and increases rates of medication initiation as well as retention in treatment, reaching individuals who, for the most part, remain underserved and impacted by high barriers. On-demand, low-threshold treatment can reach individuals by making treatment accessible and patient-centered. Achieving health equity and racial justice outcomes requires a strong focus on centering experiences. It includes looking at all perspectives, including the individuals that we're serving, and approaches of individuals most affected by structural inequities and harm associated with drug use. That includes the input and the recognition of understanding from individuals who have a history of incarceration, individuals who identify within the LGBTQ+ community, individuals who are actively using, and individuals who identify as Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. Today, the conference and the experience that you have is intended to highlight the guiding principles of low threshold buprenorphine that can facilitate and advance equitable life-saving access to care. And this is huge. That includes steps such as same-day treatment entry and medication access. It includes harm reduction, trauma-informed approaches, acknowledgement of the fact that individuals, all of us, in some way, shape, or form, have experienced some level of trauma, and recognizing that trauma, not only for the individuals being served, but integrating trauma-informed care practices into our facilities and organizations on a day-to-day basis to benefit and impact individuals who are providing the service. A wide availability of sites in non-traditional settings, utilize the community in a broader way, such as emergency departments, looking at partnerships with syringe service programs, mobile treatment sites, the ability to go to where people are. how, encampments for individuals who are struggling with housing and shelters. And I'm sure if we were to open the lines, all of you would have additional sites and non-traditional areas, if you would, that would allow for increased access to the services, support, and stability that you intend to offer. And most importantly, flexibility. Certainly, we want to safeguard and we want to protect the individuals that we serve by creating an environment and a care response that looks at consistency in process and in planning. That said, recognizing the unique and nuanced needs of the individuals we served also call for flexibility. I often say that during the time of the pandemic and our response to the pandemic, there were so many things that we had been told for so long were impossible and today are possible. I ask us not to think about the return back to the historic normal, but to continue to advance in thinking of innovative practices in which we can ensure people have access through low threshold, on demand, and safe, stable, and welcoming environments to allow individuals to be able to feel respected and safe to enter into the environments that you've created to provide care and support. I want to thank you for the opportunity today. I know that you'll continue in this conversation and thinking about how best can you provide access to individuals while not compromising the quality of the care that you provide, but rather building on the innovation and the advancements that we continue to make as we think of how we can best serve and love individuals who use drugs. Thank you so much. And to the team that has put today together, I thank you and I applaud you. To all of you, I continue to urge you to continue to move forward. I know each day can seem not always easy and can be challenging, but know that at the end of the day, what you're doing and what you're committed to, in fact, is saving people's lives. Thank you.
And thank you so much, Joanne. If you have another moment, I'll see if we can just encourage folks if they'd like to put a question in the chat or even a comment, shout outs and really words of support for, I think, a lot of the things that you had shared with us a moment ago. A lot of this work is guiding us every day. So thank you for sharing that. We have a couple minutes before our next presentation. So Claire and I will keep a look right now on in the chat and just see if folks have either a question or comment or an elaboration on that. Stand by.
Sounds good.
As they say, your call will be answered in the order in which it was received. Joanne, I guess one of the questions I had for organizations that might be newer to a lot of these things, is there something folks could put into action today, a different mindset, language that we could use, something that you could bring to the work that we do that doesn't require bigger budgets, adding more teams, but just help, how do I embrace these philosophies if they're new? The folks that are joining us today are really wide spectrum of people that are very new to harm reduction, as well as seasoned veterans to this initiative. What advice would you give to folks just starting out?
Sure. So first, I'm really glad to hear that we have a full spectrum of individuals and organizations, seasoned as well as new individuals coming onto this work. And I say that because that's how we continue to promote and advance innovative thinking, right? And also recognize that the more areas that we can provide access across this nation to support, the better off everyone is. What I would say as far as how do you build? First, I cannot stress enough how important it is to really ensure that you have the input of the individuals that you're serving from the very beginning as you develop programming. Understanding the expertise and understanding the needs of individuals can only best be expressed by those who are actually living the experience. Secondly, over-communicate. I think it's very important that over-communication happens, particularly for your administrations and those in leadership positions that can influence the work that you're doing. Over communication allows for people to feel informed and for people to feel as though they are actually a part of what's advancing. And the reality is, as we continue to advance and we look at innovative practices, with anything new, we have to spend significant and very genuine time teaching people and helping people understand why whatever we're looking to advance only builds on the evidence of what we have been doing historically, while at the same time, with a bit of risk taking, offers the opportunity to grow in what we have in our toolbox, as people say.
So thank you. And actually a direct message I got from one of our participants on the West Coast. Thank you. Good morning to those folks. And it goes to what you were saying a moment ago, and I've heard you speak on this before. That's this notion of over communicating helps inform folks about what we're doing. But could you speak a little bit about that language? You know, how can we be more equitable? How can we destigmatize, and would you mind saying a couple words on that?
Sure. Oftentimes when I do a PowerPoint presentation, I use images, and I show different images, and how too often the media and other networks of communication will represent Black and Hispanic individuals within a scene that shows two individuals laying on a bench surrounded by all sorts of garbage and graffiti. And I talk about the historic sort of trek that we've taken in criminalizing drug use, if you will, and also creating the impression that, these individuals perhaps are individuals who should be removed from our communities. And then in comparison, I show another slide that has images of individuals who primarily are white, and they are smiling, and they are not surrounded by what looks to be chaos, but surrounded by average settings, right? And most often, actually very plain backgrounds. And I talk about the shift over the years that we've seen as it went from criminalization to a space of recognizing that substance use and substance use disorder, in fact, is a disease, and became medicalized and resulted in people receiving treatment and understanding. I'm grateful, absolutely, for the trajectory that we've made to advance in our understanding of substance use and to create the spaces that can respectfully provide care and access to treatment for individuals. That said, we have to continue to push back against the stigma and recognize that any individual with a substance use disorder deserves the same level of respect and access to service. And so that's just one example. In communication has to be simple. Communication has to be transparent, and communication has to lead to additional resources so that people have ongoing ways in which they can stay informed.
Yeah, thank you. Couple great questions that just popped into the chat. And one of these, I think, really speaks to that fundamental concept of harm reduction. Do you have any tips on how to get staff who are stuck on abstinence-based recovery on board with harm reduction? Where do we begin with those folks?
Yeah, no, I think that it's like anything, right? When you want to introduce something to someone and there appears to be a resistance or a misunderstanding, what you want to do is you want to think about this from a manner of empathy. Right. And so when you talk about empathy, what you talk about with individuals is picturing yourself in a similar situation. While it may not be identical, and finding those spaces that you can identify with. So oftentimes I will talk about weight loss, right? Because weight loss is sort of a socially acceptable thing. We talk about it all the time. We're bombarded with images. And I would dare to say that many of us in the course of our lives have engaged in some type of weight loss plan. And so with weight loss, what we know is that it continues to go up and down, right? And so what happens is you get given all these tools, you utilize the tools, you feel that you've mastered the utilization of those tools, and you determine that you no longer need Weight Watchers, you can do it on your own. And if your experience is like mine, what's happened over time is that the weight loss then has been reversed and over time continues to creep up because we fall out of the habits. Helping people to identify and relate to harm reduction is about identifying those areas in their own life where they have had to practice small steps for greater gain. And also continuing to, within your organizations, create in small motion how we transition from one space to another. At a certain point, if an organizational culture is one of harm reduction, then the expectation and the standard has to be set. But if you want to maintain and find the opportunity for those individuals that are challenged by moving from away from an abstinence only treatment modality, then you have to find those small steps to help people advance, give people the language and the examples that can help them better understand, and work with them in very meaningful ways in which they can actually practice the intention of what we want to share with our clients.
Yeah, thank you. And related to that, so the first question posed was sort of that within the organization. And I believe you've kind of answered that about the same approach externally. So a related question was the challenges of other agencies that you might be working with, DSS, probation, housing, that aren't aligned on that harm reduction path. Anything
Sure.
you would answer differently about, how to work with those organizations and kind of dovetail?
Sure. So this is a reality, right? Those of us in different settings, we have different ways in which activities and support is implemented. The first core thing I have to say to everyone is stay focused on your path. Stay focused on harm reduction, stay consistent in the methodology, and continue to advance to show through evidence and time what can be accomplished. What I find when I sit at a table with the individuals of different backgrounds and understanding is that I don't place judgment, nor do I argue with individuals. What I do is I continue to put forward the way in which myself, the members of the team in which I work with, and my organization will continue to provide support and service to individuals. I have learned over the years, I've been in the public health field for probably about 30 years. And what I've learned in that time is that sometimes you don't have to leave the table with consensus. Over time, best practices will show themselves as they continue to advance and as the evidence is shown. And certainly as you see good outcomes for the people that are being served.
Yes, and I've often heard of that maybe referred to as functional consensus.
Well, there you go. Functional consensus. I'll use that moving forward. I'm not suggesting that it's not challenging and frustrating. It can be all of those things, but you also have to keep in mind what your larger goal is.
Right. So a quick shout out from actually a lot of folks. Thank you for sharing all of this. Someone just had mentioned in the chat that CMS yesterday approved a POS code for the street. So you can now bill for street-based buprenorphine treatment. They see that as a major win for our sisters and brothers experiencing homelessness to be able to access and receive the care they need. And after that comment, there were a lot of heart emojis that went up.
Absolutely, absolutely. And these are the advancements. These are the things that prior to COVID, and I use COVID as sort of a marker, if you will, but the impossible is possible, right? And so what we have to do is we have to work along with our regulators and our funders and others who influence the spaces that we're in to recognize that continuing to narrowly think about how we can do our work is only going to increase the number of people whose lives are lost. Taking our abilities to move out and find ways in which we can do things, yes, and still a coordinated, organized manner in which we all can be held accountable, but yet giving access to people who have not historically had those opportunities is the only way in which we're going to impact and change and reverse the outcomes of where we are today in this nation as it relates to opioid overdose.
Yeah, thank you. Let me just see. Yeah, and again, another shout out, just someone embracing this idea that harm reduction is less of a thing to do and more of a way to be. So thank you for sharing that, Jerry, in the chat. Let me just do a quick last call, for any comments. We're running a little bit ahead of schedule, so we can, I'll give Mila and Stacy just a quick heads up that we'll transition to them maybe a few minutes early. But Johanne, any parting thoughts and any other last minute ideas?
Well, I want to say members of my team must be shocked because usually when I speak, I tend to go overtime and everyone is scrambling to make up for the time that I've taken. So I'm quite pleased with myself today. But what I want to say, and it speaks to the last comment that you made, is that, integration into daily practice is key. Oftentimes, when we think about philosophies and we think about the way in which we do our work, whether that be about harm reduction or trauma-informed care intervention, when we think about the other ways in which we place expectation across our organizations, we're building culture and we're building expectation, both for the people that we serve and for the individuals continuing this work. And so it's very important to understand that when we talk about integration, it's not just about a training or a single event. It's about a daily intentional way to move forward in which we integrate these practices into the work that we do, and understanding that as we continue to bring on new workforce members, that we have to make sure we are doing our best to orient individuals to our organizational culture. The respect to the individuals that we serve absolutely is a foundation to our work and the success that we will have, and making that and integrating that into every moment from the point of entry to the point of exit for someone, whether that and picture that not only in entering a building, but in any conversation that we engage in, is key to how we create sustainable change and save lives.